Now I want your calls on this. Do we need a new law banning smartphones in schools? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. That's what Labour MP Josh McAllister is calling for. He says that children doom scrolling for hours a day is causing widespread harm. Many schools already have a ban in place, but it doesn't apply everywhere. Is it time that that changes? We're looking for a law across the board and not allowing schools to make their own decisions. Michael, what do you think?
I'm very sympathetic to this idea. Now, I'd have to look sort of, does it need to be a law, or can we just get schools to do it of their own accord? That, for me, is a sort of technocratic question. You need to do some surveys of secondary schools.
Some schools do it of their own accord now, but this is talking about not allowing schools to allow smartphones.
And it would probably also empower some schools who might want to do it but get some pushback from parents. I think with phones, and as an adult with a phone, right, I think we all agree they're somewhat addictive. And we often are thinking, is this improving my quality of life, or is it taking away from it? And I think when you've got something like that, something which is addictive and detracts potentially from your well-being, we normally say, let's not give that to kids. So cigarettes, drugs, alcohol. We don't normally say, oh, we might as well let them have it because that's reality, that's the future, that's what we do. So I think we should be a bit more proactive with this and say kids need, I would say, maybe a sort of type of phone that doesn't have certain apps for younger people, or only certain hours of the day.
So not a smartphone, maybe just the old-fashioned
Nokia, the one that had Snake on it as a game.
Yeah.
Well, Nokia
8210 or
8210.
something.
I think it's difficult because there will be kids, especially say young LGBT kids, for example, for whom being on a phone is actually a real lifeline because it gets to mean you meet more people like yourself. You maybe don't feel so lonely. But I think the fact that we are sort of accepting that the vast majority of kids are spending 8 hours a day on their smartphone is really, really worrying. And we are seeing rates of anxiety and depression increase among young people.
Blame smartphone use for that?
Well, lots of the statistics suggest that smartphones are a big part of the problem. It's not going to be a single cause, but it would make sense. It already makes me feel a bit anxious and self-conscious when I'm on Instagram.
But, you could argue
when you're going through puberty.
But Instagram is different from smartphones, isn't it? So is the problem social media or is the problem smartphones, the device itself?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like LGBTQ kids. I think isolation is a problem for a lot of kids. So potentially to take this away when the sort of infrastructure of how they meet and socialise outside of that no longer exists is potentially a problem. I mean, I should be clear. My son's not having one until he's 30, all right? That's just at the earliest. So I recognise...
How old is your son now?
He's 8.5, so he's got a way to go, as long as he behaves.
You can keep that rule in place for the next few years.
We'll review it at 25. I don't want to be unreasonable about this. But I do think that I'm very cautious about the idea ban. That's always the answer with everything, is ban. Kids would only have a smartphone if their parents gave it to them. They'd only have credit if their parents gave it to them. I really, really strongly believe we have to start putting responsibility back onto parents, because schools already have to do so much with breakfast clubs and various pastoral roles. It has to start in the home. I think there's already a government directive on this, and that 62% of schools have already generally banned them. But also once kids get to 16, there are people on one side of the argument who say 16-year-olds could vote. There'd be 16-year-olds that could vote but not have a phone on them at school.
Well,
that seems odd.
That is unusual actually, and a really fair point to bring up. But I'm thinking when you're putting the onus back on the parents, first of all, you've got the pester power, and actually when we're looking
that's your job as a parent, to resist that.
But you're at the mercy of every other parent in that school.
But that's the point. You've got to be a good parent. I'm sorry. I mean, it's probably, I don't want to sound unreasonable, but that is it can only come from you.
But it only takes one smartphone in that school for every child in that school to gain access to information and things that we don't want children to necessarily.
But yeah, I mean, Instagram, I totally recognise the harm of that, particularly for girls, actually. A lot of people think somewhere like Twitter or X is the most toxic place in terms of mental health outcomes. Instagram for girls it does seem to be by far the worst. But I do think the idea of potentially raising the age at which kids can have certain accounts to 16 might be a way to go about it. But there's already so much that we're taking for kids. I think maybe it's a responsibility thing. Maybe perhaps, by the time you become a teenager, you're allowed to have them at certain times at school. Then in Key Stage 4, 14, 15, 16, you have it a bit more. But the idea that secondary school kids at 11 and 12 are being sent to school with smartphones, I just can't believe that anybody sees any sense in that.
Interesting. Okay, you're both quite nuanced on that, actually. So we'll take a quick break now, but do stay with us because we'll be taking your calls in just a moment. Do we? But now your calls on whether we need a new law banning smartphones in schools. Campaigners are pushing for an all-out ban, as new figures show that 1 in 7 children spend more time on their phones than they do in the classroom. Now, number 10 says that teachers already have the power to ban them, but it's currently done on a school-by-school basis. So do we need a law just to make it the same across all schools in the country? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a call, and call you have. We're going to speak to Rashmi from London first. Do you think, Rashmi, we should be banning smartphones in schools?
Law, because I believe that...
Go on, Rashmi.
The phone died.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. No, it wasn't dead. It's the time difference, maybe. I don't know.
Oh
I
yeah,
couldn't
don't
hear
watch
you.
the.
Sorry.
Do not watch the TV. Listen to your phone and switch your TV off in the background because there is a delay and it's going to confuse you.
Sure, sure. Basically, I'm aware of that as well. I say that to all the customers. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that in my family, all 5 girls, including my brother, none of us have smartphones. And like I said, if you give a child a phone and then take it away, to me, it doesn't make sense. Why are we always having laws and not like using our little brain to think ahead and think?
Exactly. Change behaviours. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Because,
persuade,
and you know what? Every time we have these debates, I watch the ones I like, and I always think to myself, why are you wasting time having these debates? Because it should never be up to the government. These sort of things, they're parents' responsibility.
When it comes to health, things are put in the government's hands. So, for example, the government say that we have to wear seatbelts. There's still, because that is better for you. That is much safer if you get into an accident.
100%.
There are still people that do not wear their seatbelts. So people are going to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
So we need to help people make better decisions. Is that
I think there's also here a collective action problem, I think, because it might be the case that most parents would like to take the smartphone away from their kids. But if you're the first person to do it, then that might actually not be the right thing for your kid. Because if your kid, if all of their friends have smartphones, all of their friends are in WhatsApp groups, and yours is the only kid without one, then that might not actually be the right decision, because it only makes sense to get your kid off a smartphone if the other kids get off a smartphone so that then they can play in real life. But you don't want to have the only child without one, which is why the government can come in and say, we've got a collective action problem. Everyone would prefer a different situation, but when we each act individually, we sort of end in a suboptimal outcome. They step in, and I don't really understand why we shouldn't get them to do that, to make it easier for parents to make the right decision for their kids.
What do you say to that, Rashmi?
What you're saying, but why? Not why, sorry, I'm trying to be more positive. Why even have that situation sort of in the first place? Every parent, well, most parents I see at the city centre or the library, they're on their mobiles. So the child is crying, and so, it is the parent response. I've got no children, but my sister lost a son. So I know, to me, it is the parent that need to instigate it.
I see what you're saying, actually, Rashmi. What you're saying is how...
Yeah.
Well, I suppose what you're saying is parents are already addicted to their phones. We need them to make better decisions in the first place. But what Michael is saying is, yes, parents are addicted to phones. Sure. They are not making good decisions. And therefore, when you have a collective group of people making bad decisions, it spirals, and maybe it's time for the government to step in and go, look, if you're not going to do this, I will.
But the problem with that is they are emerging into a world. I don't like it. I wish we all met up with each other more in person, but they're emerging into a world which is more reliant on tech. So you can have this weird cut-off point where at 16 they've never had a phone at school, and then they go to college where they're allowed it all the time. So that's why I'm arguing for sort of grading it in, giving it as part of privileges and responsibilities, which can be taken away as well.
That's what we had, though. We didn't have smartphones as kids, and then we suddenly have them, and I think we've turned out okay.
But we evolved into that once our consciousness was kind of formed, once we were able to, at least we knew what life was like before that. I'm just saying a gradual easing in, maybe from 13.
See, I think we did have a gradual easing in because we had those brick phones that only your mum or dad had, only one in the family, really. And then we had the sort of the slightly smaller ones. Then you had the ones that you could play Snake in but couldn't really connect to the internet very well. And it was a gradual process, I think, for me certainly, but I don't think for the younger generation it is. It's almost like they don't have a phone, and then at 12 they get a smartphone, which is just access to
they're saying, yeah, 97% of 12-year-olds have smartphones, but that means how many 9-year-olds are having smartphones? And I bet that figure's high too, and I find that astonishing.
Sue from Buckinghamshire, what's your view on this?
So I don't think that smartphones are the problem. What the problem is the social media aspect of it. I know this because my son's been going through it. My son's 14, and it's the likes of Snapchat and things like that, where they're messaging each other in the safety of their own homes. Then they're going into schools, and then there's all this beef and there's all this trouble and everything else, and then it's kicking off at school, and that's what the problem is. Because the smartphone's actually, my 11-year-old, who's now at secondary school, she has a smartphone, but she uses hers she's additional needs anyway, but she uses hers for homework and for school to access the school app. So from that point of view, it's really good. But it's the Snapchat and Instagram. It's social media.
And actually,
and for as many videos that there are telling you how to set up parental controls, there are 3 times as many of children telling the other kids how to get around it.
So, yeah, exactly. They're always going to be one step ahead.
If you pay the bill, ultimately you have the control. And if you do spot checks, if you're the bill payer, you have the control at all times.
But I kind of get where Sue's coming from here. Also, your son is completely of age to be on these social media apps. I think it's 13, although there are campaigns to increase that to 16. But like we've said already, if Sue doesn't want her son to be the only one not on Snapchat. That's how they talk. That's the future. That is where everything
maybe
is
I'm a bit different. I want my son to be the only one that's comfortable with being the only one.
Friends?
Yeah, well, I don't think that will be the case necessarily. I think that social media is.
But if everyone else meets up by talking on these apps, then you could have the worst of both worlds.
We're talking about doing stuff during school time. That's the discussion, right?
No. What Sue's saying is actually the problem is social media happening after school time, because when we were at school, it finished at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever it was. You went home. Whatever had happened during the day could be forgotten about for 12 hours or for however long, or you could just have time to cool down and go over it, talk to your parents about what was said, and then. But what's happening now is people are constantly in communication with the other people in their class, and it snowballs and it gets worse, and the bullying gets worse, and then by the time they get back to school in the morning, they're even more aggy than they were at 4 o'clock.
But there's definitely more cyberbullying going on. But I'd be interested to know whether sort of actual bullying has gone down. I don't think you actually overall necessarily change the amount of bullying occurring. I suppose the big problem, though, is the sense of scale, the idea of loads of people ganging up on you.
For some reason, when something is in print or video, it is just so much more visceral than when it's just said off the cuff, I think. So you bring up a really interesting point there, and I have no answers for you. I'm really sorry you have to struggle with that. Thank you for your call. Nikki from Cheshire, what's your view on banning smartphones in schools?
Well, absolutely, I think they should be banned. And I agree with the other lady who was talking about it is the social media bit, but the children are on their social media in school on those phones. It would be much easier if they all had, did they call them dumb phones, just a bog standard phone where they can, the parents can call them on it, they can call the parents, they can be tracked on it, and it's just to answer the, I think one of your panellists actually said about parents should take responsibility. Well, yes, they should. But those parents who take responsibility haven't given their children those smartphones. And if you remember, not that long ago, the parent who was on television saying that it was to do with the fines for taking children out of school on holiday. And she said she didn't mind that the fine had gone up because it was still cheaper for her to take her children out of school during term time, and she would carry on doing it. Now, if that's indicative of the parents taking responsibility, they're not going to take responsibility and take those smartphones off the children. And parents do sort of they allow the children to sort of persuade them. No, I do need it. And I do work with a lot of young people. And I know what they're like, and they're really sneaky in school, much as I love them. They're very sneaky in school.
Nikki, I only had a sort of brick phone that played Snake, but I learned to play Snake under the table so the teacher couldn't watch it. So, I mean, I'll put my hands up. I think every child finds their own way of pushing boundaries. Nikki, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Ruth from Cheshire as well. Lots of people calling up from Cheshire. Fab, what's your view on banning smartphones?
Yes, good morning. I think it's afternoon now. My issue is take them off them, totally. Just abandon the thought that children should have the problems, that they're having problems in school, that teachers, if there is a problem, they can contact the parents if they find out there is a problem. Now, the kiddies don't need to have them. My problem is with the bullying issue, how the distraction from the lessons, from their playtime. Let them be free. Don't be having them on their phones when there are other issues in the school.
So, Ruth, listening to you would be of the argument not to even give them these sort of brick phones or dumb phones. You would want them to have absolutely no phones at all in the school.
That's right. That's right.
But the problem is, I think that's just totally out of step with the world that they're living in. I wish it wasn't like that. But, you know, part of being, I guess, a small C conservative, not the world as I wish it to be, but seeing the world as it is. And they're emerging in a highly technologically integrated world. I absolutely don't think, well, certainly they shouldn't be breaking the law by being on social media accounts they're legally not supposed to be on. But, you know, there is this argument that you've got to evolve them to a point where they enter a workplace where they'll be doing stuff on Teams, they'll be having networks and discussions there, and that needs to be a gradual evolution through their schooling life.
What do you say to that, Ruth?
I understand that. However, I know of the internal workings of a school, and the children do have workings on computers. They have access to that. Their lessons are dictated by the computers. But surely, as they grow into society, they get jobs. They then start to engage with other people, other opinions. Hopefully they can read newspapers, see adverts. There are all sorts of avenues that they can be entered into the world. I believe when I taught my kids, I said, look, kids, you're going into the rat race, and that's what it's like. Now, the mobile phones allow that even more, and they just need peace to do their work, to be allowed to have lessons and learn from other children as well.
Okay. Ruth, I'm going to have to finish. We've got so much to cover today, but I'm going to have to wrap up this part there. But thank you very much for your call. I just think it would be nice for them to have a little bit of time after school, not to have to deal with all the school issues. But that could easily be done by putting the phone in flight mode for a couple of hours. Okay, let's move on. Later.